The galaxy was in chaos. Many planets had fallen to invaders, and countless lives had been lost in the struggle. Among these worlds was Varnus Prime, a planet known for its peaceful people and beautiful landscapes. However, peace was no longer something the people of Varnus could hold on to. War had come to their doorstep, and it was taking everything from them. For years, the Eshar, a cruel and powerful alien race, had been conquering one planet after another. They were ruthless, showing no mercy, and the galaxy's heroes could do nothing to stop them. Entire civilizations were falling under their weight. The Varnusians, once proud and strong, were no exception. The Escher had set their sights on Varnus Prime, and in a matter of months, they had already controlled half of the planet. The Varnusians were struggling to defend themselves, their armies weakening with every battle. The streets of their great cities were now quiet, the sounds of war echoing through the air, as their once brilliant world became a battlefield. The leaders of Varnus, desperate and seeing no way out, decided to send out a call for help. Their message was clear. They needed assistance. The galaxy had to come together and stop the Ashar before they destroyed everything. They used every communication channel they could find, from ancient radio waves to the most advanced satellite systems. Messages were broadcast on every frequency possible, hoping to catch the attention of any ally willing to help. The Varnusians knew their chances were slim. The galaxy was filled with wars of its own, and many civilizations were already struggling. But what else could they do? They couldn't fight the Ishar alone. They needed help, desperate, urgent help. For days they waited in hope. Varnus Prime's leader spoke with urgency, trying to stay optimistic despite the growing pressure. But as the days passed, their hope began to fade. There was no response. The communication systems were still silent. The Eshar were closing in, and the situation on Varnus Prime grew worse by the hour. But then, just when the people thought they had been ignored, something unexpected happened. A new signal appeared on their scanners. Something unfamiliar. Something terrifying. The signal wasn't from the expected allies of the galaxy. It wasn't from the great powers they had sent their messages to. Instead, the signal came from far, far away, a place so distant that no one could even imagine it. The Varnusians had no idea what they were seeing. The signal was strong, overwhelming, yet unlike anything they had ever encountered. The source of the signal was a massive warship, unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Its design was strange, its structure unlike the ships from known civilizations. There were no shining, polished surfaces or sleek designs like the ones used by the galaxy's more advanced species. This ship was dark and jagged, looking like it had been built from the bones of some ancient creature. It moved toward Varnus Prime, as though it knew exactly where it was headed. And then, the unthinkable happened. The ship didn't announce its arrival in a formal, diplomatic way. It didn't ask for permission to enter the system. Instead, it just came. Powerful and unyielding. It didn't ask for the Varnusians' trust, nor did it offer any comfort. It was as if the ship already knew what it was going to do. On Varnus Prime, panic began to set in. Some feared the worst, that the ship was another force sent by the Eshar to destroy what was left of their world. Others wondered if this was some kind of rescue, though none could be certain. The leaders of Varnus, still hanging onto the thread of hope that someone would help them, were caught between relief and fear. The ship's appearance had been sudden, and its nature was a mystery. For days, the people of Varnus waited, unsure of what would come next. The strange ship remained in orbit above their planet, silent, unmoving, but clearly present. They tried to communicate with it, sending messages of peace, but received no answer. They sent everything they had: questions, requests for aid, and even desperate pleas. But still, the ship did not respond. The Eshar, meanwhile, seemed undisturbed. They had their eyes set on the planet, and they continued to push their invasion forward. They were prepared to strike at any moment, confident that Varnus Prime was all but lost. But they hadn't counted on the ship. The warship above the planet had not shown its hand yet, and the Ashar were beginning to grow uneasy. Then, at long last, the ship moved. It descended toward the surface of Varnus Prime, slowly and deliberately. There was no explosion of light, no dramatic show of power, just a quiet descent. The people of Varnus watched as the ship's dark form came closer and closer, until it hovered just above the ground, the shadows of its massive size casting an ominous presence over the planet below. The Varnusians held their breath. No one knew what would happen next. The Ashar had been waiting for this moment, preparing for an assault. They had no idea who the new arrivals were, but they were not prepared to let them interfere with their plans. But then, a strange thing happened. Instead of fighting, instead of attacking the planet's defenses or engaging in the battle the Varnusians had feared, the warship simply landed. It landed with a calmness that was unsettling. The ship didn't destroy anything. It didn't burn the landscape with weapons or take the skies in a rush of laser fire. It landed in silence, and then, as the smoke cleared, the hatch of the ship slowly opened. From the ship emerged figures, tall, dark figures, with skin that seemed to shimmer with the faintest light. Their movements were sharp, confident, and deliberate. These were not the kind of beings the Varnusians had ever seen before.
They wore dark armor, not of metal, but of something much more ancient, organic, almost like bone. Their eyes were strange, glowing faintly in the dim light.
And when they spoke, their language was harsh and guttural, like the sound of the wind howling through a broken, ruined city. These were the Cormac, a race known in whispers across the galaxy. They were not heroes or knights, not saviors sent to save the day. They were survivors of the most hostile environments in the universe. They came from worlds that were dying, that were beyond hope, where life had to fight for every breath. Their worlds had taught them how to survive against impossible odds, and they had mastered the art of war in ways the galaxy could never understand. The Cormac were not merciful, and they did not believe in half measures. They did not offer their help out of kindness or pity. The Varnusians didn't know it yet. But the Cormac had come to make a deal. They would fight the Eshar, yes, but they would demand payment. In their world, survival meant sacrifice, and nothing was free. The Varnusians had called for help, and the Cormac had answered. But their help would not come without a cost. What price would the Varnusians be willing to pay to survive? The first battle would soon begin, and it would be unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The Cormac were unlike anything the Varnusians had ever encountered. While the Ashar were brutal and oppressive, the Cormac were a different kind of threat, one that promised salvation but demanded a price that was unknown. The Varnusians, who had once lived in peace, now found themselves face to face with these ruthless warriors from the Death Worlds. The Cormac warship sat above Varnus Prime, its massive shadow spreading across the land. The Varnusians watched in awe and fear as the ship's hatch slowly opened. The dark figures that emerged from the ship were like nothing the people had ever seen before. Tall, with glowing eyes and armor that seemed to pulse with life, the Cormac moved with a deliberate, almost predatory grace. They made no attempt to speak with the Varnusian leaders immediately. Instead, they spread out, as if they were assessing the situation around them. The Varnusians had called for help, but what they received was not the kind of aid they had imagined. They had hoped for an army, a force, to push back the Eshar. What they got was something far more dangerous, something they didn't fully understand. For days, the Cormac did not explain themselves. They set up camp, their warriors training in the fields, sharpening their weapons, preparing for the inevitable clash with the Eshar. The Varnusians tried to speak with them, but the Cormac would only respond with silence or short, cryptic answers. They seemed to have no interest in diplomacy, only in the fight that was coming. Then, the Varnusian leaders were summoned to a meeting with the Cormac. There, standing before them, was the leader of the Cormac forces, a towering figure whose presence seemed to fill the room. His armor was darker than the others, adorned with markings that signified his rank. His eyes glowed faintly, the same eerie light that shone from the rest of his people. He spoke with a voice that was deep and gravelly, his words slow and heavy with meaning. "We have come to fight the Eshar," the Cormac leader said. "But our help comes at a price. Nothing is free, not in the universe we come from." The Varnusians looked at each other, uneasy. They had no choice but to listen, as they knew that without the Cormac, they would fall to the Eshar. But they were not prepared for what came next.
"The cost of our aid is simple,"
the Cormac leader continued.
"We will fight for you. We will destroy the Eshar, but you will give us what we desire in return."
"We will take the strongest of your people, those with the most potential, and they will fight for us in our arenas." The Varnusians had not expected this. The Cormac were not asking for resources or land. They were asking for something much more personal, something far more unsettling. "We fight to survive," the Cormac leader explained. "In our world, only the strong remain. The weak perish. We take the finest of your warriors, your leaders, your fighters, and they will prove their strength in our arenas. If they survive, they will earn the right to join us. If they fail, they will die." The Varnusians could hardly believe what they were hearing. The Cormac were not offering a traditional alliance. They were offering a chance to fight, but only for those who had the strength to survive. Those chosen would be taken to the Death Worlds, a place where no mercy was shown, where survival was the ultimate test. For many, the idea of sending their people to fight in such brutal conditions was unacceptable. But the leaders of Varnus Prime were trapped. They had no choice. The Eshar were too powerful, and without the Cormac's aid, their planet would be lost. They could not afford to turn away from this offer, no matter how disturbing it was.
Adra, one of the Varnusian commanders, stood up to speak.
She was a fierce warrior, known for her tactical mind and her leadership skills. She had lost family and friends in the battles against the Eshar, and she was determined to do whatever it took to save her planet. But she was also deeply troubled by what the Cormac were demanding. "Are we really willing to send our people to their deaths?" Adra asked, her voice steady, though there was a hint of doubt in it. The Cormac leader met her gaze. "Your people will not die unless they are weak. Those who have strength will thrive. Those who do not will not survive. That is the way of the Death Worlds. It is the only way we know."
The room fell silent again. The Varnusians understood the meaning of those words.
The Cormac did not see death as something to fear. It was simply a part of life, a part of survival. To them, weakness was unforgivable. Yorlan, a young and hot-headed fighter, spoke next. He was known for his rebellious nature and his unwillingness to back down from a challenge.
"If we agree to this, we're not just sending warriors to fight.
We're sending them to die. How can we be sure that the Cormac will honor their word?"
What if they just use us as cannon fodder? The Cormac leader's eyes narrowed. "We will honor our word."
But remember, you are the ones who called for help. We are giving you a chance. You can choose to refuse, but understand that the Eshar will not. They will destroy your planet, and nothing will remain.
The decision is yours. The tension in the room was palpable.
The Varnusians knew they were being forced into a corner with no easy way out. But they also knew that without the Cormac, their planet would fall. They had to accept the deal, no matter how uncomfortable it made them. The cost of survival was steep, but it was the only chance they had. Adra stood in silence, weighing the decision in her mind. She knew that the Cormac had their own code, one that was far different from the Varnusians' sense of morality. But she also knew that if they didn't take this chance, they would lose everything. She turned to the other leaders. "We have no choice," she said quietly. "We'll send our best warriors to the Cormac."
But we must make sure that the survivors come back to us. We can't let them be lost to this.
"This madness forever?" The leaders nodded grimly. They understood the sacrifice that was being asked of them. The warriors who were chosen for the Cormac's trials would face challenges that no one could imagine. But the hope of survival, the hope of victory against the Ashar, was too great to ignore. The Cormac leader gave a single, sharp nod. "We will fight the Ishar, and we will win. But remember, this is a test of strength. Only the strong will survive. Those who cannot prove themselves will die. There is no mercy in the Death Worlds."
With that, the meeting ended, and the leaders of Varnus Prime were left with a heavy decision. They would send their best warriors to fight for the Cormac, but the consequences of that choice would be far-reaching.
The Varnusians had hoped for an ally, someone who could help them defeat the Ashar. What they got in return was an offer that was both a lifeline and a trap. As the Varnusians began to prepare their chosen warriors for the trials ahead, they couldn't help but wonder what kind of people they would become. Would they return as heroes, or would they be lost forever? Just another casualty of the Cormac's brutal code. The future of Varnus Prime now rested in the hands of those who were willing to risk everything. And as the Cormac's ships began to mobilize, the warriors of Varnus Prime prepared for the greatest fight of their lives. They had no idea what lay ahead, but they knew one thing. The galaxy would never be the same again. The Varnusians had no time to waste. The warriors they had chosen to fight for the Cormac were ready. They had spent days preparing, training, and saying their goodbyes. For many, this was a fight they never imagined they would face. The Cormac had promised them victory, but at what cost? No one truly understood what awaited them on the Death Worlds. All they knew was that they had been chosen, and they had no choice but to obey. Audra and Jorlin were among those selected. Both had been leaders on Varnus Prime, skilled fighters with strong reputations. But now, they were more than that. They were the hope of their people, the best chance to turn the tide in this desperate war. They had volunteered to fight in the Cormac's arena, hoping to survive and find a way to bring back what they had learned. They didn't know if they would ever return home. As they boarded the Cormac transport ships, the reality of what was happening began to sink in. The air was thick with tension. The warriors silent as they prepared for what they knew would be a battle like no other. The Cormac, who had accompanied them, stood stoically at the front of the ship. Their faces were unreadable, but their eyes held something darker, a sense of expectation that sent a chill down Audra's spine. They traveled for what seemed like an eternity. The ship moved through space at incredible speed, far from the safety of Varnus Prime. There was nothing familiar in the vast expanse of stars that stretched before them. The Varnusians had no idea where they were going or what they would find when they arrived. They could only sit in silence, waiting for their fate to unfold. Eventually, the ship came to a halt. The doors slid open with a hiss, and the warriors were greeted by a sight that made their blood run cold. The Death Worlds were a place that no one should have to visit, let alone survive. The land stretched out before them in jagged, rocky terrain, covered in thick, dark clouds that blocked out the sun. The air was heavy, thick with a burning scent, like something long dead. The Cormac wasted no time. They marched forward without hesitation, their steps sure and unyielding. The Varnusians followed, though their movements were slower, more cautious. They had no idea what dangers lay ahead, but they knew they had to trust the Cormac if they wanted to survive. As they moved deeper into the Death Worlds, they encountered the first of the trials. The ground began to tremble, and the air seemed to grow even heavier. Then, from the shadows, a massive creature emerged. It was unlike anything the Varnusians had ever seen. A towering beast with razor-sharp teeth and thick, armored scales. Its eyes glowed red as it stalked toward them, its massive claws digging into the earth. The Cormac warriors didn't flinch. They were ready. Without warning, they charged forward, attacking the creature with brutal force. Their weapons were unlike anything the Varnusians had ever used, large, heavy blades designed to kill quickly and without mercy. The Cormac moved like a well-trained pack, working together to bring the beast down. Audra and Jorlin watched in awe. The speed and power of the Cormac were beyond anything they had imagined. They had been told that survival here was about strength, but seeing the Cormac in action made them realize just how much they had underestimated the reality of the Death Worlds. When the beast finally fell, the Cormac stood over it, their faces cold and impassive. To them, it was just another fight, another victory. But for the Varnusians, it was a reminder of the stakes they were facing. They were not just fighting for survival. They were fighting for their very lives. And in this place, there was no room for weakness. The Cormac turned to them then, their eyes locking onto Audra and Jorlan. "This is only the beginning," the Cormac leader said in his deep, gravelly voice. "The Death Worlds do not give mercy."
You must prove your strength. Only then will you survive.
The Varnusians had no choice but to accept the challenge. They could not afford to hesitate. They had to prove themselves, or they would die. It was that simple. They followed the Cormac deeper into the Death Worlds, knowing that each step they took brought them closer to the trials they had been forced to face. As they moved through the desolate landscape, they encountered more creatures, massive, terrifying beasts that seemed to appear out of nowhere. Some were predators, others were scavengers, but all of them were deadly. The Varnusians fought back with everything they had, using the weapons they had been given. They fought alongside the Cormac, doing their best to keep up, but they were clearly outmatched. Audra could feel the strain in her muscles as she fought, the weight of the trials wearing on her. But she pushed through. She had no choice. The Cormac were watching, and failure was not an option. Every time they defeated a creature, she could see the Cormac's eyes, cold and calculating, measuring their worth. The hours turned into days, and the days into weeks. The Varnusians were pushed to their limits, tested in ways they never imagined. The Death Worlds were unforgiving, and the creatures they faced were relentless. The Cormac showed no mercy, and neither did the land itself. One night, as they rested around a small fire, Audra spoke to Jorlan in quiet tones.
"Do you think we can survive this?" she asked, her voice filled with doubt.
Jorlan looked at her, his expression hard. "We have no choice," he replied. "The Cormac don't care if we live or die. They only care about our strength. If we don't fight, we won't survive. If we want to get out of here, we have to prove that we're worthy." Audra nodded, knowing that he was right. The Death Worlds were not a place for the weak. The Cormac had made that clear from the start, and if they wanted to escape, they would have to fight every step of the way. The next day, they faced their toughest trial yet. The Cormac led them into a vast cavern, where the walls were covered in thick vines that seemed to move on their own. The air was thick with humidity, and the ground was slick with slime. It was impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. As they ventured deeper into the cavern, the ground beneath them began to shake. From the darkness, something massive stirred. The Cormac were already moving, their weapons raised, their eyes scanning the shadows. Audra and Jorlan followed, their hearts pounding in their chests. They knew that whatever was coming, they had to face it. Out of the shadows, a massive creature emerged. It was like nothing they had ever seen. A creature with the body of a serpent and the head of a massive bird. Its wings were large enough to send gusts of wind through the cavern, and its beak was sharp enough to slice through metal. It screeched, the sound deafening as it lunged toward them. The Varnusians fought with all their might, but the creature was too fast, too strong. It knocked them aside with ease, its claws raking across their armor. Jorlan gritted his teeth and pushed himself to his feet, charging at the beast with all the strength he had. But he was no match for it. Audra watched in horror as the creature struck Jorlan down, his body crashing into the ground. She ran to him, pulling him away from the creature's claws. But the beast was relentless. She had to think fast, had to do something, anything, to survive. With a fierce cry, she grabbed one of the Cormac's weapons, a long, jagged blade, and charged at the creature. She didn't know if it would be enough, but she had to try. With all the strength she had left, she drove the blade into the creature's side. It roared in pain, thrashing violently as it tried to shake her off. But Audra held on, pushing herself to her limits. Finally, with one last powerful strike, she drove the blade deep into the creature's heart. It let out a final, blood-curdling scream before collapsing to the ground. Audra fell to her knees exhausted, her heart pounding in her chest. She had done it. She had survived. But she knew that this was just one battle. The Death Worlds had many more trials in store for them. And if she wanted to make it out alive, she would have to keep fighting. The battle for survival had reached its peak. For weeks, the warriors of Varnus Prime had been thrust into the brutal world of the Cormac, each day bringing a new trial, a new danger. But despite the unrelenting challenges, the Varnusians had not given up. Audra and Jorlin, the two most skilled and determined among them, had fought side by side with the Cormac. They had proven their strength, their courage, and their will to survive. But they knew, deep down, that the greatest test was yet to come. The Death Worlds, with their endless dangers, had not yet shown the full extent of their horrors. Now, as the Varnusians continued their struggle, a dark realization began to settle over them. The Cormac were not just warriors. They were survivors of a harsh, unforgiving world, and they fought for reasons far beyond what the Varnusians could comprehend. The Cormac had given them no mercy, no rest, pushing them to the limits of their endurance. They had witnessed the brutal and unyielding strength of the Cormac warriors, their cold, calculating eyes always watching, always measuring. The Cormac didn't fight for honor or glory. They fought because it was the only way to survive. And now, as the last trial approached, Audra and Jorlin had to confront the truth. Survival in the Death Worlds was not just about strength. It was about sacrifice. It was about who was willing to give up everything to see another day. As they journeyed deeper into the wastelands, the air thick with heat and dust, Audra couldn't help but wonder how much longer they could hold on. They had seen so much death, so much destruction, and each day seemed to take a little more of their humanity away. They had become like the Cormac, survivors, focused only on the next fight, the next challenge, the next moment. But Audra refused to lose herself in this world of endless war. She couldn't, not yet. She had to keep fighting, not just for her own survival, but for the hope of her people back on Varnus Prime. They were still out there, still struggling against the Ashar. And if she and the other Varnusians could make it out alive, they would return to fight for their freedom. The Cormac had promised them victory against the Ashar, but that promise came with a price. They would fight in the Cormac's arenas, where only the strongest would survive. And as Audra and Jorlin pressed on, the weight of that truth began to settle heavily on their shoulders. Would they make it? Or would they become just another casualty of the Death Worlds? It wasn't long before the Cormac led them to the heart of the Death Worlds. The arena. It was a vast hollow expanse, filled with ancient ruins and crumpled stone walls. The ground was uneven, and the air was thick with the smell of decay. The arena was a place of madness, a place where the strongest fought for dominance, where survival was the only law. The Varnusians stood at the edge of the arena, their eyes wide with disbelief.
They had seen the Cormac fight, but they had never witnessed anything like this. The arena was unlike any battlefield they had ever known.
It was a place where only the most ruthless would prevail, where every fight was a matter of life and death. Audra turned to Jorlin, her expression grim. "This is it," she said. "The final test." Jorlin nodded, his face hard with determination.
We have to make it through this. We have to survive.
For Varnus. Together, they stepped into the arena, the Cormac warriors surrounding them, their eyes cold and calculating. The crowd, if it could be called that, was silent, watching the newcomers with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. The Varnutians were nothing more than fresh meat to the Cormac, a test to see if they had what it took to survive. And if they failed, they would be discarded, like the others before them. The arena was vast, stretching out in all directions. In the center was a large stone platform, surrounded by pits and obstacles. The Varnutians could see strange creatures lurking in the shadows, their eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. These creatures were the Cormac's greatest challenge, a test of speed, strength, and endurance. The creatures were massive, their teeth sharp as knives, their claws like blades. Some were half beast, half machine, and all were deadly. Audra and Jorlin knew they had no choice but to fight. They had to prove their strength, or they would become another casualty of the Death Worlds. The Cormac stood ready, waiting for the signal to begin. There was no hesitation, no fear in their eyes. This was their world, and they knew exactly what it took to survive. The horn sounded, and the battle began. Audra and Jorlan charged forward, their weapons drawn. The creatures in the arena lunged at them, their massive jaws snapping. Audra dodged to the side, her blade flashing in the air as she struck one of the creatures across its armored hide. It roared in fury, but Audra didn't stop. She kept moving, her mind focused on the task at hand. She had to survive. She had to win. Jorlin was beside her, his own weapon cutting through the air as he fought off another beast. His eyes were filled with fire, and his every move was calculated, precise. He was a fighter, born and raised for this kind of battle. But even he could feel the weight of the arena pressing down on him. The creatures were relentless, and there was no mercy here. The Varnutians fought with everything they had. Every strike, every block, every move was life or death. The Cormac warriors watched from the sidelines, their faces expressionless, as if they were waiting for the Varnutians to fail. But Audra and Jorlin didn't give up. They couldn't. They fought on, pushing through the pain, pushing through the exhaustion. As the battle raged on, Audra could feel herself growing weaker. Her muscles burned with every movement, her breath coming in ragged gasps. But she refused to stop. She couldn't afford to. Not now. Not when the fate of her people rested on her survival. Jorlin, too, was struggling. The creatures they fought were relentless, and their numbers seemed endless. But Jorlin refused to back down. He fought with everything he had, knowing that this was his chance to prove himself. This was his chance to show the Cormac and the universe that Varnus Prime would not be easily defeated. The arena was a blur of motion as the battle reached its peak. The creatures were growing more aggressive, and the Varnutians were starting to tire. But they couldn't afford to stop. They couldn't afford to fail. The Cormac were watching, and they would not show mercy to those who did not survive. Audra's blade cut through the air, striking down another beast. She turned to Jorlin, who was locked in a fierce struggle with one of the larger creatures. He was on the ground, his back pressed against the stone as the creature loomed over him, its massive jaws snapping. Audra didn't hesitate. She ran toward him, her sword raised, and with one powerful strike she took down the beast. Jorlin was free, and the two of them fought side by side once more. The Cormac leader stood at the edge of the arena, his eyes never leaving the battle. He watched the Varnutians closely, calculating, measuring. Would they survive? Would they be worthy of joining them, of becoming part of their brutal world? The answer would come soon. As the last of the creatures fell, the arena fell silent. The Varnutians were covered in blood, their bodies battered and bruised. They stood tall, despite the pain, their weapons still in hand. They had proven themselves. They had survived. But the Cormac were not done yet. The leader of the Cormac stepped forward, his expression unreadable.
"You have survived the arena," he said, his voice deep and cold. "But this is not the end. This is only the beginning." Audra and Jorlin exchanged a glance, their hearts heavy.
They had fought hard, but they knew that the true test was still ahead. The Death Worlds were not just a place to survive. They were a place where only the strongest could endure. And the Varnusians were just beginning to understand what that truly meant. As the Cormac led them away from the arena, Adra and Jorlan knew that their journey was far from over. They had survived the first trial, but there were many more to come. And as they looked toward the future, they realized one thing: survival was no longer just about fighting for their lives. It was about proving that Varnus Prime still had a place in the universe, that it was a world worth saving. The reckoning had only just begun.